Ruby Thorne stared at the trunk her family had packed, the brass buckles glinting in the pale morning light that streamed through her bedroom window. Everything she owned had been neatly folded and arranged inside dresses, books, keepsakes, all for a man whose face she'd never seen, whose voice she'd never heard. A stranger waiting for her in the untamed wilderness of Wyoming Territory, 1878. "You don't have to go," her mother said softly from the doorway, wringing her hands in her apron. "We can write to him, explain that circumstances have changed." Ruby traced her fingers over the leather strap of the trunk. At 22, she was considered a spinster in their small Connecticut town. After her father's death had left them drowning in debt, the mail-order bride arrangement had seemed the only solution to save her family's home. "Nothing has changed, Mother," Ruby replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Walter Davies has paid for my passage and expects a bride. I gave my word." Her mother crossed the room and took Ruby's hands in hers. "But to travel all that way to marry a man you've never met." Ruby straightened her shoulders. "His letters were kind. He owns a cattle ranch. He promised to take care of me." Words on paper. That was all she had to cling to as she prepared to leave everything she'd ever known behind. The train journey west was long and dusty, the landscape changing dramatically outside her window. Lush forests gave way to rolling plains, then jagged mountains. Ruby clutched the latest letter from Walter Davies, reading it for the 100th time. His handwriting was neat and precise, describing the town of Sweetwater Springs and his ranch 5 miles outside it. He'd written about the house he'd built, the apple trees he'd planted, how he hoped she would be happy there. After nearly a week of travel, the train pulled into Sweetwater Springs with a hiss of steam and screech of brakes. Ruby gathered her belongings, heart pounding. This was it. Her new life was about to begin. The platform was crowded with travelers, ranch hands, and townspeople. Ruby scanned the faces, looking for a man who might be Walter Davies. According to his letters, he was 42, tall, with graying brown hair. She saw no one matching that description. "Miss Thorne." A boy of about 12 approached her, cap in hand. "Are you Miss Ruby Thorne?" "Yes, I am," she replied, relieved that someone was expecting her. "Mr. Davies sent me to fetch you. I'm Billy. I help out at his ranch sometimes." The boy gestured to her trunk. "We'll take the wagon. Mr. Davies couldn't come himself on account of being laid up." Laid up. Ruby's stomach tightened with concern. "Is he ill?" Billy shrugged. "Shot in the leg. Doc Miller says he'll mend, but he can't ride just yet." Shot. The word hung in the air between them. Ruby swallowed hard. Welcome to the West, she thought grimly. Billy helped load her trunk onto a weather-beaten wagon and offered his hand to help her climb up to the seat. As they pulled away from the station, Ruby took in her first real look at Sweetwater Springs. The main street was lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a hotel, a saloon, and what appeared to be a small church at the far end. People moved about their business, some pausing to glance curiously at the wagon and its unfamiliar passenger. "Town's not much," Billy commented, "but it's growing. When Mr. Davies first came here 5 years back, there wasn't but a trading post and a few cabins." Ruby nodded, trying to imagine herself living in such a raw, unfinished place. "And his ranch, what is it like?" "It's a good spread," Billy said with obvious admiration. "Got about 200 head of cattle now, decent water rights. The house is real nice, he built it himself. 2 stories with glass windows and everything." That sounded promising. Ruby had feared a crude cabin or sod house. They left the town behind, following a rutted dirt road that wound through scrubby hills. The landscape was unlike anything Ruby had ever seen, vast and open, with mountains rising in the distance. beautiful in its way but intimidating in its emptiness. About an hour later, Billy pointed ahead. There it is, Davies Ranch. Ruby leaned forward eagerly. A two-story house stood on a small rise, surrounded by several outbuildings. It was painted white, with a covered porch wrapping around the front far more substantial than she had dared to hope. Relief flooded through her. As they approached, Ruby noticed a man sitting on the porch. Her heart quickened. Walter Davies, her future husband. But as they drew closer, she realized this couldn't be the man from the letters. This man was younger, perhaps 30, with dark hair and broad shoulders. He stood as the wagon approached, and she could see he wore a gun belt slung low on his hips. Billy pulled the wagon to a stop. "This here's Miss Thorne," he called out. The stranger approached, moving with an easy grace despite the obvious limp in his right leg. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. He studied Ruby with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Miss Thorne," he said, removing his hat. "I'm Owen Morgan. Welcome to Davies Ranch." Ruby looked around in confusion. I don't understand. Where is Mr. Davies?" A shadow crossed Owen Morgan's face. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Walter Davies passed away 3 days ago. The wound became infected and there was nothing Doc Miller could do." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ruby. She gripped the edge of the wagon seat to steady herself. "Dead, but I meant to marry him." "Yes, madam, I know." Owen Morgan's blue eyes held a mixture of sympathy and something else she couldn't quite define. "I was Walter's foreman. He asked me to look after things if things went badly." "I see." Ruby didn't see it all. What was she to do now? A bride without a groom, thousands of miles from home with no money to return. "And what am I to do, Mr. Morgan?" He offered his hand to help her down from the wagon. "For now, you'll stay here. The house is yours, after all. Walter left everything to you. To me." Ruby allowed him to assist her down, noticing the strength in his calloused hand. "But we weren't married." "He changed his will when he sent for you, said it was the proper thing to do." Owen nodded to Billy to start unloading her trunk. "We can figure out the rest later. You must be tired from your journey." Ruby stood in the yard, trying to make sense of this unexpected turn of events. She was exhausted, confused, and utterly adrift. The future she had reluctantly accepted had vanished before it could begin. Owen seemed to sense her distress. "Miss Thorne, I know this isn't what you expected, but you're safe here and you have choices. We can talk about them once you've had a chance to rest." His kindness nearly undid her composure. "Thank you," she managed, blinking back tears. He led her up the porch steps and opened the front door. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, a large main room with a stone fireplace, solid furniture, and to her surprise, bookshelves lined with volumes. A staircase led to the second floor. "Your room is upstairs," Owen said. "Walter had it prepared for you. There's a woman from town, Mrs. Abernathy, who comes to help with cooking and cleaning. She'll be by tomorrow." Ruby nodded, taking it all in. "And where do you stay, Mr. Morgan?" "I have quarters above the stable," he replied. "I won't intrude on your privacy." That was something, at least. She wouldn't be alone in the house with a man she'd just met. "Billy will bring up your trunk," Owen continued. "There's hot water for washing up, and Mrs. Abernathy left stew warming on the stove. I'll leave you to settle in." He turned to go, but Ruby stopped him. "Mr. Morgan, how did Mr. Davies, how was he shot?" Owen's expression darkened. "Cattle rustlers. We caught them trying to drive off a dozen head. There was a fight." He touched his leg absently. "I got this. Walter got worse." "I'm sorry," Ruby said, meaning it. Whatever she might have felt about marrying a stranger, she wouldn't have wished such a fate on him. "He was a good man," Owen said simply. "He was looking forward to your arrival, Said it was about time this place had a woman's touch. His eyes met hers briefly, then he nodded and left her alone in what should have been her marital home. Ruby climbed the stairs slowly, her legs heavy with fatigue. The bedroom was large and airy, with a four-poster bed covered in a handmade quilt. Fresh wildflowers stood in a jar on the dresser. Someone had tried to make it welcoming for her. The gesture brought tears to her eyes. She sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to weep for Walter Davies, for her old life in Connecticut, for the uncertain future that now stretched before her. When Billy brought up her trunk, Ruby had composed herself. She washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and went downstairs to find food. The stew was hearty and flavorful, though she ate little. Her appetite had abandoned her along with her plans. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, Ruby sat on the porch, watching the ranch settle for the night. Ranch hands moved between the barn and bunkhouse. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called to one another. The vast Wyoming sky blazed with more stars than she had ever seen. She heard footsteps and turned to see Owen approaching, a mug in each hand. "Thought you might like some coffee," he said, offering one to her. "Thank you." She accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into her chilled fingers. Owen settled into a chair nearby, stretching his injured leg out before him. For a while they sat in silence, watching the night deepen around them. "What will happen now?" Ruby finally asked. Owen took a sip of his coffee before answering. "That depends on you, Miss Thorne. As I said, this place is yours. You could sell it, use the money to return east or start fresh somewhere else. And if I stayed," the question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him, "then you'd be the owner of a working cattle ranch. It's not an easy life, especially for a woman alone, but it can be a good one." He studied her face in the dim light from the windows. "Is that something you'd consider?" Ruby looked out at the darkened landscape. "I don't know. I came here to be a wife, not a rancher." Owen nodded slowly. "There's no rush to decide. Stay the winter at least. See if this land speaks to you the way it does to some of us." "Is that how it is for you, Mr. Morgan? Does this land speak to you?" A smile touched his lips for the first time. "It does. I came west after the war with nothing but my horse and saddle. Worked my way from Texas to Colorado, then here. When I saw these hills, something told me I'd found where I belonged." Ruby could hear the genuine feeling in his voice. "And working for Mr. Davies. Walter gave me a chance when I needed one, made me his foreman 2 years ago. We were partners in a way. He had the business sense, I had the experience with cattle. He must have trusted you a great deal. I'd like to think so." Owen finished his coffee and set the mug aside. "Which is why I intend to honor his last request." "Which was?" "To look after you, Miss Thorne, to make sure you were safe and had whatever you needed." He met her gaze directly. "I gave him my word." There was something in the way he said it that made Ruby believe him completely. This was a man who took his promises seriously. "I appreciate that, Mr. Morgan," she said softly, "though I'm not sure what I need right now beyond time to think." "Time you have." He rose to his feet, wincing slightly as he put weight on his injured leg. "Get some rest, Miss Thorne." Things often look clearer in the morning light. As she watched him walk away toward the stables, Ruby wondered if that would be true. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this situation. She had come west with a specific purpose to be a mail-order bride to a man she'd never met. Now that man was dead, and she found herself the unexpected owner of a cattle ranch, with a handsome foreman who had promised to look after her. What would her mother say? Ruby almost laughed at the thought. Her practical, proper New England mother would be scandalized by the entire situation. With a sigh, Ruby finished her coffee and went inside, locking the door behind her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it after a good night's sleep. The morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through curtains she had forgotten to close. Ruby dressed quickly in one of her plainer dresses and pinned her hair in a simple style. If she was to get a true sense of this place, she needed to see it in operation. Downstairs, she found a plump, cheerful woman of about 50 bustling around the kitchen. "There you are, dear. I'm Ida Abernathy. So pleased to meet you, though the circumstances are not what any of us hoped for." She wiped her hands on her apron and came forward to clasp Ruby's hands warmly. "Poor Mr. Davies was so looking forward to your arrival, had me baking pies and airing out curtains for weeks." Ruby found herself warming to the woman's friendly manner. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Abernathy. I appreciate you coming to help." "Nonsense, I'm happy to do it. Now sit down and have some breakfast. You're much too thin for Wyoming winters. They'll blow you away like a tumbleweed." Ruby obediently sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Abernathy served her eggs, bacon, and biscuits still warm from the oven. It was more food than she usually ate in the morning, but she found herself unexpectedly hungry. As she ate, Mrs. Abernathy chattered about the town, the ranch, and the people Ruby would need to know. It was a welcome distraction from her own troubled thoughts. "And Owen Morgan," Ruby ventured when there was a pause in the conversation. "What can you tell me about him?" Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. "Ah, our Mr. Morgan. Finest horseman in 3 counties and not hard on the eyes either, as I'm sure you've noticed. Came here about 5 years ago, same time as Walter. They met on the trail drive up from Texas, I believe. He mentioned he fought in the war. Yes, for the Union. Doesn't talk about it much, but I gathered he was quite young when he enlisted. 17 or 18, perhaps." Mrs. Abernathy lowered her voice. "Some say he was a scout. Others say he rode with a rough bunch after the war. But whatever his past, he's been nothing but honorable since coming here." Ruby considered this information. And he and Mr. Davies were close, like brothers, despite the age difference. Walter had no family, you see. I think he saw something of himself in Owen. Mrs. Abernathy began clearing the dishes. "Now, is there anything special you'd like me to prepare for dinner? I usually come 3 times a week, but I can come more often if you need me." 3 times is fine," Ruby assured her. "And whatever you usually make will be wonderful." After breakfast, Ruby decided to explore the ranch. She put on her shawl and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The ranch was more extensive than she had realized the night before. Beyond the main house stood a large barn, stables, a bunkhouse, and various corrals and pens. Men were at work everywhere mending fences, tending to horses, moving cattle between pastures. Ruby walked toward the barn, curious about the daily operations. As she approached, she heard Owen's voice giving instructions to several cowboys. She paused, not wanting to interrupt. "Johnson, take 2 men and ride the north boundary. Fisher reported seeing strangers up that way yesterday." Owen's tone was authoritative but not harsh. "Patterson, that new mare needs more work before she's ready for the trail. Spend an hour with her this morning." The men nodded and dispersed to their tasks. Owen turned and spotted Ruby standing nearby. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Good morning, Miss Thorne. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, though it wasn't entirely true. She had tossed and turned much of the night. "I thought I would see the ranch in daylight. Would you like a tour?" he offered, "if you're not too busy." Never too busy to show the owner her property. There was a hint of teasing in his voice, but his eyes were kind. He showed her around the entire operation, explaining the seasonal work of a cattle ranch, the breeding program Walter had established, the water rights that made their land particularly valuable. Ruby tried to absorb it all, though much of it was foreign to her. It's overwhelming, she admitted as they walked back toward the house. I know nothing about raising cattle. You don't have to, Owen assured her. That's what you have ranch hands for. Walter rarely worked directly with the herd. He handled the business side contracts, sales, supplies. Which I also know nothing about, Ruby pointed out. Owen smiled. You could learn. Or you could hire someone to manage it for you, she glanced at him. Someone like you if you wanted. He shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. Or you could sell. There are buyers who would take it off your hands immediately. And what would happen to you? To the men who work here. We'd find other ranches. That's the way of things out here. But something in his expression told her he cared more than he was letting on. This land meant something to him, as did the men who worked it. I won't make any hasty decisions, Ruby said. As you suggested, I'll stay through the winter at least. Relief flickered across his face. I think that's wise. They had reached the house and Ruby turned to face him directly. Mr. Morgan, I appreciate your candor and assistance, but I'm curious about something. What's that? When Mr. Davies sent for me, did you think it was a good idea? A mail-order bride from back east. Owen considered the question carefully before answering. Walter was lonely. He built this place from nothing, but he wanted someone to share it with. I understood that. That doesn't quite answer my question, Ruby pressed. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, it doesn't. He met her gaze steadily. I thought he was taking a risk, bringing a city woman out here. I thought you might take one look at this rough country and demand to be put back on the first train east. I see. Ruby wasn't sure whether to be offended or amused by his frankness. And now? Now I think you might have more grit than I gave you credit for. But the West tests everyone, Miss Thorne. It remains to be seen if you'll stay. With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Ruby to ponder his words. There was a challenge in them, subtle but unmistakable. He didn't think she would last. Well, Ruby thought as she watched his retreating figure, perhaps it was time to prove Owen Morgan wrong. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Ruby spent her mornings learning the business side of the ranch, reviewing the ledgers and contracts Walter Davies had kept meticulously organized. In the afternoons, she often rode out with Owen or one of the other hands to see different parts of the property. Mrs. Abernathy came 3 times a week to cook and clean and gradually became a friend and confidante. As October turned to November, the air grew sharper, the nights longer. Ruby wrote regular letters to her mother, assuring her she was safe and well, if somewhat uncertain about her future. She avoided mentioning that her intended husband had died before she arrived, knowing it would only cause worry. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the distant mountains, Ruby sat at Walter's desk, her desk, now reviewing the accounts. There was a knock at the door and Owen entered, stamping snow from his boots. Sorry to disturb you, he said, but I wanted to let you know we've moved the cattle to the winter pasture. It's looking like an early winter. Thank you, Ruby replied, setting aside her pen. Is there anything we need to prepare? We're well stocked on feed and supplies. He hesitated, then added, though there is one matter we should discuss. Ruby gestured for him to take a seat. What is it? The cattle buyers from Chicago. They'll be in Cheyenne next month for the winter auction. Walter usually went himself to negotiate the best prices. And now that responsibility falls to me, Ruby surmised. Owen nodded. You could send me in your place, but the buyers might not take a foreman as seriously as the owner, she finished for him. Exactly. And there's the matter of the contract for next year's drive. It needs to be finalized before the end of December. Ruby considered the problem. Then I should go to Cheyenne. Owen looked surprised. It's a 3-day journey each way in winter conditions, and Cheyenne can be rough. Are you saying it's too dangerous for me, Mr. Morgan? There was a challenge in her voice. He met her gaze steadily. "I'm saying it won't be comfortable, and you'll need to be prepared for some hard travel." "I've been taking riding lessons," she reminded him. She had indeed spent hours learning to ride properly, not side saddle as she had back east, but astride like the women who had grown up in this territory. "And I'm stronger than I look." A smile touched his lips. "I'm beginning to see that." He stood up. "We'll leave in 2 weeks then. I'll make the arrangements." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think I'd let you travel to Cheyenne alone, did you? Besides, you'll need someone who knows the buyers and their tricks." Ruby couldn't argue with that logic. "Very well, Mr. Morgan, we'll go to Cheyenne." After he left, Ruby sat back in her chair, wondering if she had made a rash decision. A week-long journey with Owen Morgan in winter conditions, followed by business negotiations she barely understood. It was madness, and yet she felt more alive than she had in years. The challenge of it, the necessity of proving herself capable, these things stirred something in her that had long been dormant. The preparations for the Cheyenne trip occupied much of Ruby's time over the next 2 weeks. Mrs. Abernathy helped her alter some of her dresses for riding and insisted she take a heavy wool coat that had belonged to Mrs. Abernathy's late husband. "You'll freeze in those Eastern clothes," she scolded. "Wyoming winters don't care how pretty you look." Ruby accepted the coat gratefully. She had already discovered that her wardrobe, suitable for Connecticut parlors, was woefully inadequate for ranch life. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cold. Ruby dressed in her warmest clothes, woolen trousers under her riding skirt, a flannel shirt, and Mrs. Abernathy's coat. She braided her hair tightly and tucked it under a wide-brimmed hat. Owen was waiting in the yard with 2 saddled horses and a pack horse loaded with supplies. He looked her over appraisingly. "You'll do," he said with a nod of approval. "Ever ridden this far before?" "You know I haven't," Ruby replied, checking the cinch on her saddle as he had taught her. "But I'm a quick learner." "That you are." He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "We'll take it slow the first day, no point wearing ourselves out at the start." They rode out as the sun cleared the eastern hills, casting long shadows across the frosted grass. Ruby found herself enjoying the rhythm of the journey, the steady movement of her horse beneath her, the vast landscape unfolding around them. Owen was a quiet traveling companion, speaking when necessary but comfortable with silence. By midday, Ruby's muscles were protesting the unaccustomed exercise, but she said nothing. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch, then continued on. As the afternoon wore on, Ruby found it increasingly difficult to maintain her posture. Every jolt sent pain shooting through her lower back and thighs. Owen noticed her discomfort. "We'll stop at Miller's Creek for the night," he said. "It's about an hour ahead. There's a line shack there where we can shelter." Ruby nodded gratefully. An hour she could manage. The line shack turned out to be a small but solid cabin used by the ranch hands when working far from the main house. It had a stone fireplace, 2 narrow cots, and basic supplies. While Owen tended to the horses, Ruby attempted to start a fire with cold, numbed fingers. She was still struggling with the kindling when he came in, carrying their saddlebags. Without comment, he knelt beside her and took over the task. Within minutes, a small fire was crackling in the grate. "I've never had to build a fire before," Ruby admitted, warming her hands at the growing flames. "In Connecticut, we had servants for that. And at the ranch, you have ranch hands," Owen said, standing to remove his coat. "Out here, we do for ourselves." "I'll learn," she promised. "Show me properly tomorrow." He gave her an appraising look, then nodded. "All right. For now, rest. I'll see about dinner." He produced salt pork, beans, and coffee from their supplies and soon had a simple but hearty meal cooking over the fire. Ruby watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked. "To live so, self-sufficiently?" Owen stirred the beans before answering. "Necessity, mostly. My father died when I was young. My mother did her best, but there were 4 of us children and not much money. I started working when I was 12, stable boy, farm hand, whatever I could find." He shrugged. "Then the war came and I enlisted, learned a lot more about survival then." "How old were you when you enlisted?" 16. Lied about my age, of course. Ruby tried to imagine it, a boy of 16 going off to war. That must have been terrifying. It was. His voice was matter of fact, but it was also an escape, a chance to see something beyond the small Ohio town where I grew up. He glanced at her. "Not so different from what brought you west, perhaps." She considered this. "I suppose not, though my journey was less dangerous. Don't be too sure." A smile flickered across his face. "You're only a few days in." They ate dinner, sitting cross-legged by the fire, the simple food made delicious by hunger and the cold air. Afterward, Owen showed her how to clean their plates with sand when water was scarce. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Ruby added another log to the fire, grateful for its warmth. "You should take the cot nearest the fire," Owen said, arranging his bedroll on the cot farthest from the hearth. "It'll be warmer." "Thank you," Ruby said, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation alone in this small cabin, miles from anyone else. In Connecticut, it would have been scandalously improper. But this wasn't Connecticut, and different rules applied in this wild country. Besides, Owen had maintained a respectful distance since her arrival at the ranch, never overstepping the boundaries of propriety despite the unusual circumstances. They settled onto their respective cots, the fire casting dancing shadows on the log walls around them. "Mr. Morgan," Ruby said into the quiet darkness, "may I ask you something?" "Owen," he corrected. "Out here there's no need for formality, and yes, you may ask me anything." "Owen, then." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why did you stay? After Mr. Davies died, I mean." "You could have moved on, found work at another ranch." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I gave Walter my word that I would look after the ranch and you when you arrived until things were settled. I don't break my promises." "And when would you consider things settled?" Another pause. "When you decide what you want to do with the ranch, sell it, keep it running with a hired manager, or—" He trailed off. "Or," she prompted. "Or leave," he finished quietly. "Go back east where life is easier." Ruby propped herself up on one elbow, trying to make out his expression in the dim light. "Do you think I will leave?" He turned his head to look at her. "I don't know. Would you be happy here, Ruby? Truly happy, not just making the best of things?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "I don't know either," she admitted, "but I'm not ready to give up yet." Something shifted in his expression, approval, perhaps, or respect. "Good," he said simply, and rolled over to face the wall. Ruby lay back down, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and listened to the wind whistling around the cabin corners. Despite her aching muscles and the hard cot beneath her, she felt strangely content. There was honesty here, and clarity of purpose, that she had never found in the drawing rooms and social constraints of her former life. With that thought, she drifted off to sleep, the sound of Owen's steady breathing a reassuring presence in the darkness. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping at lined shacks or small settlements along the way. True to his word, Owen taught Ruby how to build a fire properly, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to spot landmarks that would guide them if they became separated. By the fourth day, Ruby's body had adjusted somewhat to the rigors of all-day riding. Her muscles still ached, but it was a manageable discomfort rather than the agony of that first day. She found herself noticing more of the landscape around them, the way the light changed over the plains, the movements of wildlife, the subtle variations in terrain that Owen pointed out. "There's Cheyenne," Owen said late in the afternoon of the fourth day, pointing to a sprawl of buildings ahead. "We'll reach it before dark." As they rode closer, Ruby could see that Cheyenne was much larger than Sweetwater Springs, a proper city with multi-story buildings, busy streets, and the unmistakable signs of the railroad that had made it an important hub for the region. "We'll stay at the Drover's Hotel," Owen told her as they entered the outskirts of town. "It's clean and respectable, and many of the cattle buyers stay there." The Drover's Hotel was indeed clean and well-maintained, if not luxurious. The proprietor, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Hollis, showed Ruby to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Dinner's served until 8, she informed Ruby. "And I don't allow any foolishness in my establishment." "I assure you I have no interest in foolishness," Ruby replied with a tired smile. "Only a hot bath and a soft bed." Mrs. Hollis nodded approvingly. "Bath can be arranged, $1 extra." "Well worth it," Ruby said fervently. An hour later, clean and dressed in one of her better dresses, a dark blue wool that Mrs. Abernathy had altered to be more practical for ranch life, Ruby made her way downstairs to the dining room. Owen was waiting for her, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest and jacket. The sight of him, looking so handsome and at ease, caused a flutter in her chest that she quickly suppressed. "You look rested," he said as she joined him at a table near the window. "The journey wasn't too difficult." "Nothing I couldn't handle," she assured him, though her muscles still protested every movement. "When will we meet the cattle buyers?" "Tomorrow morning. They usually gather at the exchange building around 10. Owen signaled to a waiter. "Tonight you should rest and prepare." These men are sharp negotiators. Over a dinner far better than line shack fare, Owen briefed her on the cattle buyers they would meet, their backgrounds, preferences, and negotiating tactics. Ruby listened carefully, asking questions and committing details to memory. "Mr. Collins always starts with an offer 15% below market value," Owen explained. "And Mr. Drummond will try to find fault with the quality of the herd, no matter how prime the stock." "And how do I counter these tactics?" Ruby asked, "with facts and confidence." "You know the quality of your cattle, you know the fair market price. Don't let them bully you into accepting less." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "And the contract for next year's drive, what should I be prepared to negotiate there?" Owen smiled approvingly. "Now you're thinking like a rancher." He proceeded to outline the key points of the contract: delivery dates, head count, price per pound, and contingency clauses for various scenarios. By the time they finished dinner, Ruby's head was swimming with information, but she felt more prepared than she had that morning. "Get some sleep," Owen advised as they parted in the hotel lobby. "Tomorrow will be a long day." In her room, Ruby reviewed her notes by lamplight, determined to represent the ranch effectively. She would not embarrass herself or Owen by appearing uninformed or easily manipulated. As she finally blew out the lamp and settled into bed, Ruby realized how much her perspective had shifted in the weeks since her arrival in Wyoming. She had come as a mail-order bride, expecting to be a wife and helpmate to a stranger. Now she was a ranch owner preparing to negotiate cattle contracts with experienced buyers. The transformation seemed impossible, yet here she was. And much of that transformation, she had to admit, was due to Owen Morgan's guidance and belief in her capabilities. He had never once suggested she couldn't handle the responsibilities thrust upon her. Instead, he had steadily taught her what she needed to know, allowing her to make her own decisions. It was a type of respect she hadn't experienced before, and it made her feel both powerful and humbled. With these thoughts circling in her mind, Ruby drifted off to sleep, dreaming of wide open spaces and a pair of steady blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The exchange building was imposing, a 3-story brick structure with large windows and ornate moldings. Inside, the main hall buzzed with activity as ranchers, buyers, and various businessmen conducted their affairs. Ruby felt conspicuously out of place as one of the few women present, but she straightened her shoulders and followed Owen toward a group of well-dressed men gathered near the coffee service. "Gentlemen," Owen said as they approached, "allow me to introduce Miss Ruby Thorne, owner of the Davies Ranch." The men turned, surprise evident on their faces. Ruby met their gazes steadily, extending her hand in greeting. "Good morning, gentlemen. I understand you've done business with Davies Ranch in the past." The oldest of the group, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, recovered first. "Miss Thorne, unexpected pleasure. I'm Samuel Collins. These are my associates, Mr. Drummond and Mr. Pearson. Mr. Collins, I've heard much about you." Ruby smiled pleasantly. "Shall we discuss this season's cattle?" The negotiations that followed were tense and complex. True to Owen's warning, Collins opened with an offer well below market value, citing concerns about the railroad rates and meat prices in eastern markets. Drummond questioned the quality of the herd, suggesting that cattle from the Davies Ranch might not be as prime as in previous years. Ruby countered each point with the facts. Owen had armed her with the exceptional weight gain of their steers due to the rich summer grazing, the low incidence of disease in their herd, the favorable reports from previous buyers. Throughout the discussion, Owen remained a silent presence at her side, allowing her to lead but available if she needed assistance. Ruby found his quiet confidence bolstering her own. After nearly 2 hours of back and forth, they reached an agreement on price higher than Collins' initial offer, though not quite as high as Ruby had hoped. The contract for next year's drive proved easier to negotiate, with only minor adjustments to the terms Walter had established in previous years. As they concluded their business, Collins regarded Ruby with newfound respect. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Thorne." Walter Davies chose his successor well. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I look forward to a continued beneficial relationship between your company and Davies Ranch." Ruby shook hands with each of the buyers, maintaining the professional demeanor she had observed in Owen and the other ranchers. Only when they had left the exchange building did she allow herself a small sigh of relief. "That was intense," Owen grinned down at her. "You were magnificent." Collins didn't know what hit him. "I was terrified the entire time," Ruby confessed. "I kept waiting for them to realize I've only been involved with the ranch for a few months. They never suspected." Owen guided her across the busy street. "You spoke with authority and knowledge. That's all that matters in these negotiations." Ruby felt a warm glow of pride at his praise. "Thank you for preparing me so thoroughly. I just provided information. You're the one who used it effectively." He checked his pocket watch. "It's nearly noon. Shall we celebrate your success with lunch at the hotel restaurant? It's considerably better than our trail fare." Ruby readily agreed, her appetite sharpened by the morning's tension. As they walked back to the hotel, she was acutely aware of Owen beside her, his tall figure, the way he adjusted his stride to match hers, the protective way he positioned himself between her and the street traffic. The hotel restaurant was bustling, but they secured a table by the window. Over a lunch of roast beef and vegetables, they discussed the morning's negotiations and the plans for their return journey. "We should start back tomorrow," Owen advised. "The weather looks favorable, but that can change quickly this time of year." Ruby nodded agreement. "I'm ready whenever you are, though I must admit, a proper bed is a luxury after those line shack cots. Too soft for my taste," Owen said with a wry smile. "I've spent so many years sleeping rough that feather mattresses feel strange now." "Surely you don't prefer the ground," Ruby teased. "Not the ground, no, but something firmer than these hotel beds," he shrugged. "Old habits, I suppose." Ruby studied him across the table, curious about the life experiences that had shaped him. "Will you tell me more about your years after the war, before you came to Wyoming?" Owen's expression grew guarded. "Not much to tell that would interest a lady." "I think you underestimate what might interest me." Ruby held his gaze. "We've spent 5 days traveling together. Surely that earns me some candor." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough, but not here too many years." "Where then?" "There's a park not far from here. We could walk there after lunch if you'd like." The park was small but pleasant, with bare branched trees and wooden benches. Despite the chill in the air, several people strolled along the paths, enjoying the winter sunshine. Owen and Ruby found a secluded bench away from the main walkway. "After the war," Owen began without preamble, "I drifted south. Worked as a cowhand in Texas for a while, then joined up with a cattle drive heading to Kansas. That became my life for several years, driving herds north to the railheads, then finding new work for the next season." "It sounds unsettled," Ruby observed. "It was. I wasn't looking to put down roots then. The war had left its mark, and I didn't much care what happened to me." He stared at the distance, as if seeing those years unfold before him. "I rode with some rough men, did things I'm not proud of. What changed?" Ruby asked softly. Owen was quiet for a moment. "I was in a bad saloon fight in Abilene, nearly died. While I was recovering, a local preacher visited me. He didn't preach, just talked, asked me what I was running from." A faint smile touched his lips. No one had ever asked me that before. "Made me think about my life, the direction it was heading." "And what were you running from?" Ruby ventured. "Memories, mostly. Guilt. I'd survived when many of my friends hadn't." He shook his head. "After that, I decided to find something more purposeful than drinking and fighting. I learned more about cattle breeding, management, the business side. That's when I met Walter on a drive from Texas. He was looking for someone who understood cattle to help establish his ranch in Wyoming. I was looking for a fresh start." Ruby absorbed this, seeing how it aligned with the man she had come to know: principled, hardworking, loyal. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I know it's not easy to speak of difficult times." "No, it isn't." He met her gaze directly. "Your turn now. What brought you to agree to marry a man you'd never met, thousands of miles from home?" Ruby hadn't expected the question to be turned back on her, but fairness demanded she answer as honestly as he had. "Necessity, like you," she admitted. "After my father died, we discovered he had borrowed heavily against our home and business. There were creditors demanding payment, and no way to satisfy them except by selling everything. Even then, it wouldn't have been enough." She twisted her hands in her lap, remembering the desperation of those days. "My mother saw an advertisement for mail-order brides. She suggested it as a solution not just for me, but for our whole family. If I married a man of means, I could send money to help them keep the house." "So you sacrificed yourself for your family," Owen said quietly. Ruby hadn't thought of it that way. "It wasn't quite so noble. I had few prospects in our town, and at 22 I was considered firmly on the shelf. The idea of a fresh start appealed to me, even under such strange circumstances. And Walter's letters convinced you he would be a suitable husband. They were kind, thoughtful letters. He wrote about the ranch, the house he had built, his hopes for the future. He seemed like a decent man. Ruby sighed. I was prepared to be a good wife to him, I was. Relieved when his letters didn't suggest passion was his primary motivation. Owen raised an eyebrow at this candid admission. Ruby felt her cheeks warm. That was too frank. I apologize. No need. I appreciate your honesty. He studied her face. And now? With Walter gone, what do you want for your future? It was the question Ruby had been asking herself for weeks. I'm not sure yet, she said slowly. But I'm beginning to think I might want to stay, to make the ranch work. It feels like an opportunity I never expected. Something flickered in Owen's eyes, approval perhaps, or something deeper. The ranch could thrive with you at the helm, Ruby. You've shown that today. His use of her given name, rare enough to still cause a flutter in her chest, combined with his evident belief in her abilities, left Ruby momentarily speechless. There was a tension between them suddenly, an awareness that had been building during their journey but which neither had acknowledged. Owen broke the moment, standing abruptly. We should head back to the hotel. There are supplies we need to purchase before we leave tomorrow. Ruby rose, composing herself. Of course, lead the way. They spent the remainder of the afternoon acquiring supplies for the return journey and for the ranch: coffee, sugar, flour, ammunition, and various items that were harder to come by in Sweetwater Springs. Ruby also purchased fabric, thread, and a few personal items from a dry goods store. As they walked back to the hotel, their arms laden with packages, Ruby found herself oddly content. The trip had been successful beyond her expectations, not just in terms of the cattle contracts, but in her growing confidence in her new role. And there was Owen, a steady presence beside her, respectful of her authority yet supportive when she needed guidance. She glanced at him as they walked, noting the strong profile, the quiet competence in his bearing. Something was changing between them, something neither had voiced but both felt. The question was what to do about it, if anything. Ruby wasn't sure she was ready to confront those feelings, not when she was still finding her footing in this new life. And Owen, for all his directness in other matters, had been careful to maintain a professional distance. That evening, they dined together in the hotel restaurant once more, discussing the preparations for their departure the next morning. The conversation was comfortable, focused on practical matters, with no hint of the deeper currents that had surfaced in the park. As they finished their meal, Owen said, "We should leave at first light. The weather's holding, but I'd like to make good time while we can." Ruby nodded agreement. "I'll be ready." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Owen, for everything today. I couldn't have managed those negotiations without your guidance." "You give me too much credit," he replied with a small smile. "You're a natural businesswoman. Walter would have been proud." The mention of Walter Davies brought a momentary awkwardness. It was easy to forget sometimes that she had come to Wyoming to be his wife. "I hope so," Ruby said softly. "I feel as though I owe it to him to make the ranch succeed." "You don't owe him anything," Owen said, his voice gentle but firm. "Whatever arrangement was between you ended with his death. The ranch is yours now to do with as you choose." Ruby considered this. "Perhaps, but I still feel a responsibility to him, to the men who work there, to the legacy he built." "That's who you are," Owen observed. "Someone who honors commitments even when circumstances change. It's a rare quality." The warmth in his eyes as he said this made Ruby's heart beat faster. She looked down at her empty plate, suddenly flustered. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "I should prepare for our early start." Owen stood as well. "Of course. I'll see you in the morning." He walked her to the foot of the stairs that led to the hotel rooms, maintaining a respectful distance. "Good night, Ruby," he said softly. "Good night, Owen." She ascended the stairs, feeling his gaze on her back until she reached the landing and turned out of sight. In her room, Ruby packed her few belongings, her mind racing with thoughts of the day's events, the successful negotiations, Owen's revelations about his past, the growing awareness between them. What did it mean? What did she want it to mean? She had come west prepared to be a wife, but fate had intervened. Now she found herself drawn to a man very different from the one she had expected to marry, younger, more vital, with a complexity that both intrigued and unsettled her. And yet, was she ready for such feelings? It had been barely 2 months since her arrival. She was still adjusting to the dramatic changes in her life, still learning what it meant to be responsible for a ranch and the men who worked it. As she prepared for bed, Ruby resolved to focus on the immediate future, the journey back to the ranch, the winter preparations that would need her attention, the continued learning of her new role. Whatever was developing between her and Owen would have to find its own pace, its own time. With that decision made, she blew out her lamp and settled under the covers, allowing the events of the day to fade as sleep claimed her. The return journey to the ranch began as planned, at first light the next morning. The weather remained clear but cold, with a brisk wind that cut through Ruby's layers of clothing. She was grateful for Mrs. Abernathy's heavy wool coat and the thick gloves Owen had insisted she purchase in Cheyenne. They rode steadily through the morning, stopping briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. The conversation between them was easy but focused on practicalities, the condition of the trail, landmarks to watch for, the behavior of the horses. Neither mentioned the more personal exchange they had shared in the park. By mid-afternoon, clouds were building on the western horizon. Owen eyed them with concern. "We should push on to reach the line shack at Pine Creek," he said. "Those clouds look like snow." Ruby nodded agreement, though her muscles were already protesting the long hours in the saddle. They increased their pace, the horses seeming to sense the urgency. The wind picked up as the afternoon waned, carrying a bite that hadn't been present earlier. Ruby pulled her scarf higher around her face, squinting against the cold air. The first snowflakes began to fall as the sun disappeared behind the thickening clouds. "How much farther?" Ruby called to Owen, who rode slightly ahead. 3 miles, maybe 4, he replied, glancing back at her. "Can you manage?" "Of course," she assured him, though in truth she was exhausted and increasingly cold. The snow intensified rapidly, driven by the strengthening wind. Soon it was difficult to see more than a few yards ahead. Owen slowed his horse, waiting for Ruby to draw alongside him. "Stay close," he instructed. "It's easy to become disoriented in these conditions." Ruby nodded, too cold now for unnecessary words. They rode side by side, their horses plodding steadily through the accumulating snow. The world had narrowed to a white blur, with only Owen's solid presence beside her as an anchor. After what seemed like hours but was probably less than one, Owen pointed ahead. There, through the swirling snow, Ruby could make out the dark shape of a cabin. Relief flooded through her as they approached. The line shack was similar to the one they had stayed in on their outward journey, a single room with a fireplace, 2 cots, and basic supplies. Owen helped Ruby dismount, her limbs so stiff with cold she could barely stand. "Get inside," he said, pressing the cabin key into her numbed fingers. "I'll see to the horses." Ruby fumbled with the lock, finally managing to open the door. The interior was freezing, but at least it offered shelter from the wind and snow. She set about building a fire as Owen had taught her, her cold, clumsy fingers making the task more difficult than it should have been. By the time Owen came in, stamping snow from his boots, she had a small flame started. He quickly added more wood, building the fire to a proper blaze. "The horses are settled in the lean-to," he reported. "They'll be fine. This storm looks like it's setting in for the night, though." Ruby huddled close to the fire, trying to stop her teeth from chattering. "Will it delay our return?" "Probably. We might need to stay here tomorrow if it's still bad." He looked at her with concern. "You're freezing. Get those wet things off and wrap up in a blanket." He turned his back to give her privacy, busying himself with unpacking their supplies. Ruby changed quickly, replacing her snow-dampened clothes with dry ones and wrapping a rough wool blanket around her shoulders. She was still cold to the bone, but the fire was beginning to warm the small cabin. "Better?" Owen asked when she told him he could turn around. "Getting there," she replied, her voice still shaky with cold. "I've never experienced anything like that storm. It came on so suddenly." "Mountain weather," he said, hanging his wet coat near the fire to dry. "It can change in minutes. That's why I wanted to reach shelter before dark." He set about preparing a simple meal: jerky softened in hot water, biscuits from their supplies, and strong coffee. Ruby watched him work, grateful for his competence in these harsh conditions. Without him, she would have been in serious trouble. As they ate, sitting close to the fire for warmth, the wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters and sending occasional gusts of smoke back down the chimney. "Will the storm affect the cattle?" Ruby asked, thinking of the herd they had left in the winter pasture. "They know how to find shelter," Owen assured her. "And the winter pasture has good windbreak stands of trees, natural draws in the land. They'll bunch together for warmth. Cattle are tougher than they look." Ruby smiled slightly. "Like mail-order brides from the East." Owen's laugh was warm and genuine. "Exactly like that." His expression grew more serious. "You've impressed me, Ruby. Not many women would have handled this journey as well as you have." "I've had an excellent guide," she replied, meeting his gaze across the firelit space between them. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "You're giving me too much credit again. Your strength comes from within." The compliment touched her deeply. In her previous life, she had been valued for her social graces, her pleasing appearance, her suitable family connections. No one had ever praised her inner strength. "Thank you," she said softly. "Though I think we both know I would have been lost without your help these past weeks." "You would have found your way," Owen insisted. "You have a natural resilience." Ruby considered this. "Perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to test it alone." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what you asked in Cheyenne about what I want for my future." Owen's focus sharpened. "And I want to stay," she said with newfound certainty. "I want to make the ranch work. It feels right in a way I didn't expect." The smile that spread across Owen's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I was hoping you'd say that." "You were." Ruby was surprised by the intensity of his reaction. "Yes." He seemed to debate with himself before continuing. "The ranch needs you, Ruby. The men respect you, and he broke off, looking into the fire. "You what?" she prompted gently. Owen met her gaze directly. "I've come to care for you." "More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." Ruby's heart seemed to skip a beat. Though she had sensed a growing attraction between them, hearing him voice it so plainly was different. "The circumstances," she repeated. "You came here to marry another man," Owen said. "And I was his friend, his employee. It doesn't seem right to." He trailed off, clearly struggling to find the right words. "To develop feelings for his intended bride," Ruby finished for him. Owen nodded, his expression troubled. "Walter was a good man. He deserved better than to have his foreman coveting his wife, or would-be wife, before he's even properly mourned." Ruby understood his conflict. She had wrestled with similar thoughts. "But I never was his wife," she said softly. "And while I came here prepared to honor that commitment, fate intervened. Still." Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "It feels disloyal. Would Walter have wanted the ranch and me to remain in mourning indefinitely?" Ruby asked. "From what you've told me, he was a practical man who valued happiness." "He was," Owen acknowledged, "and he would have wanted you to be happy, however that might come about." Ruby moved from her place by the fire to sit beside him on the rough wooden bench. "Then perhaps we should honor his memory by not denying ourselves a chance at happiness." Owen looked down at her, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I care for you too, Owen Morgan." Ruby's voice was steady despite the fluttering of her heart. "I didn't expect it, I wasn't looking for it, but it happened all the same." The confession hung in the air between them, as tangible as the wood smoke from the fire. Owen reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "Ruby Thorne," he said, her name like a caress on his lips, "when you came off that train, looking so out of place and yet so determined, I thought you would be gone within a week. I never imagined—" "Nor did I," she whispered. "But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? That it does." His hand moved to cup her face more fully. "May I kiss you, Ruby? Or is that too forward?" In answer, Ruby leaned in, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. The kiss was brief but charged with promise of deeper feelings, of possibilities neither had dared voice until now. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Yes," Ruby agreed, "but perhaps for the better." He smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his face. "I'd like to think so." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But we should take this slowly. You're still adjusting to life here, and I don't want to complicate things more than they already are." Ruby appreciated his consideration. "Slowly, then. Though I think we've already moved beyond conventional courtship given our current situation." She glanced around the small cabin where they would spend the night alone together. Owen chuckled. "True enough. Though I'll be sleeping on the floor tonight to preserve what propriety we can." "You don't have to," Ruby began, but he cut her off with a gentle finger to her lips. "Yes, I do. If I'm to court you properly as you deserve, then certain lines shouldn't be crossed. Not yet." His eyes held hers, serious but warm. "I respect you too much for anything less." Ruby felt a surge of affection for this complex man capable of surviving the harshest conditions, yet bound by a code of honor that seemed rare in this wild territory. "Very well," she conceded. "Though the cot will be cold without you." "Don't tempt me, Miss Thorne," he warned with a smile. "My resolve has limits." They returned to their meal, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, though the awareness between them had deepened. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the cabin, a different kind of warmth had taken hold, one that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with newfound possibilities. As they prepared for sleep, Owen arranged his bedroll on the floor near the hearth, stubbornly refusing the cot despite Ruby's protests. She finally gave in, settling onto the narrow bed with an extra blanket against the chill. "Good night, Owen," she said, watching his silhouette in the dimming firelight. "Good night, Ruby," he replied softly. "Sleep well." Despite the howling wind and the uncomfortable cot, Ruby fell asleep with a smile on her lips, feeling more at peace than she had since arriving in Wyoming. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them with Owen by her side, not just as her foreman, but as something more. Something with potential to grow into a partnership neither had anticipated but both now welcomed. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, forcing them to remain at the line shack. Owen ventured out briefly to check on the horses and gather more firewood, returning covered in snow but reporting that the animals were faring well in their sheltered lean-to. They passed the day in conversation, learning more about each other's lives before Wyoming. Ruby told Owen about her childhood in Connecticut, her education at a ladies' seminary, the social season in which she had failed to secure a suitable match. Not for lack of offers, she clarified, but none that appealed to me. My mother was most distressed by my excessive selectivity, as she called it. And what were you selecting for? Owen asked, genuinely curious. Ruby considered the question. Intelligence, kindness, a willingness to see me as more than an ornament or a means to an heir. She smiled wryly. Unfortunately, those qualities seemed in short supply among eligible gentlemen of my acquaintance. Their loss, Owen said simply. In turn, he shared more about his childhood in Ohio, his brief schooling, the various jobs he had held before and after the war. He spoke of his travels across the country, the characters he had met, the landscapes that had moved him. I never intended to settle anywhere, he admitted. The open road had become my home, but something about this land. He gestured toward the snow-obscured window. It gets under your skin, makes you want to put down roots. I'm beginning to understand that, Ruby said. There's a freedom here that I never experienced in the East. A sense that you can shape your own destiny. Exactly. Owen looked pleased that she understood. That's what Walter saw too. He came west with nothing but determination and a good head for business, built the ranch from scratch. Ruby had been curious about Walter Davies but hesitant to ask too many questions, given Owen's earlier discomfort about their developing feelings. Now, though, it seemed important to understand the man who had inadvertently brought them together. Tell me more about him, she requested. Not just as a rancher, but as a person. Owen leaned back against the cabin wall, gathering his thoughts. Walter was principled, honest to a fault. He didn't talk much about his past, but I gathered he'd had some hard times back east before coming west. He worked harder than anyone I've ever known up before dawn, last to bed at night. Did he have family? Friends? No family that he ever mentioned. Friends, yes, though not many close ones. He kept people at a distance, except for a few he trusted. Owen smiled slightly. I was honored to be one of those few. Why did he never marry before? Ruby asked. Surely there were women in the territory who would have been interested in a successful rancher. There were, Owen confirmed, but Walter was particular, said he'd rather be alone than with the wrong person. He glanced at Ruby. When he decided to send for a mail-order bride, it surprised me. But he said he was getting older, wanted someone to share his life with, someone who might bring different perspectives. And he chose me based on a letter and a photograph, Ruby mused. It seems so strange now. He said your letter showed intelligence and character, and your photograph. Owen hesitated. Yes, Ruby prompted. He said you had kind eyes. Owen's gaze met hers. He was right about that. Ruby felt a pang of sadness for the man she had never met. I think I would have liked him. You would have, Owen agreed. And he would have appreciated your determination to make the ranch succeed. They fell silent, each contemplating the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. By evening, the storm had begun to abate, the wind dropping to occasional gusts rather than the constant howl of the previous night. We should be able to travel tomorrow, Owen said as they prepared their evening meal, though the going will be slow with the fresh snow. Ruby nodded, feeling both relief that they could continue their journey and a strange reluctance to leave the intimate bubble of the line shack, where their relationship had transformed so fundamentally. Owen, she said as they finished eating, when we return to the ranch, what then? Between us, I mean. He considered the question carefully. "I'd like to court you properly if you're amenable. No rushing, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other better. And the men at the ranch, what will they think?" "They'll respect whatever develops between us as long as we're straightforward about it." Owen took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But I understand if you'd prefer discretion, at least initially." Ruby thought about it. "I don't want to hide exactly, but perhaps we could be reserved in public until things are more settled." "Reserved in public it is," Owen agreed with a smile. "Though I make no promises about my behavior when we're alone." The heat in his eyes sent a shiver of anticipation through Ruby. "That seems fair," she managed to say, her voice slightly breathless. He brought her hand to his lips and placed a kiss on her knuckles. "Good, because I plan to kiss you properly once we're safely back at the ranch." The promise hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities. They set out at first light the next morning, the world transformed by the snowstorm. The landscape was a pristine white expanse, beautiful but challenging to navigate. Owen led the way, finding the trail beneath the snow through landmarks and his experienced knowledge of the terrain. Progress was slow, as he had predicted. By midday, Ruby's muscles were aching from the effort of keeping her horse moving through the deep snow. They stopped briefly to rest and eat, but Owen was anxious to make as much distance as possible before dark. "We won't make it to the next line shack tonight," he told her as they remounted. "But there's a sheltered spot about 2 hours ahead where we can make camp." Ruby nodded, resigned to another night in the elements. The novelty of the adventure had worn thin, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a longing for the comfort of the ranch house. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds occasionally, creating a dazzling glare off the snow that made Ruby's eyes water. She kept her focus on Owen's back, trusting him to find the safest path forward. As promised, they reached a sheltered area as the light began to fade, a natural depression protected by rocky outcroppings and a stand of pine trees. The snow was shallower here, making it easier to set up camp. Owen quickly constructed a lean-to using pine branches and their tarpaulin, then built a fire in front of it to reflect heat into their shelter. It was basic, but would keep them from the worst of the cold. Too tired for much conversation, they ate a simple meal and prepared for sleep. The lean-to was small, forcing them to lie close together for warmth. Owen wrapped his coat around both of them as an extra layer, his arm serving as Ruby's pillow. "This is definitely not the proper courting I promised," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Circumstances dictate flexibility," Ruby replied, snuggling closer to his warmth. "I won't tell if you won't," he chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest against her ear. "Your reputation remains intact, Miss Thorne. We're merely surviving the elements." "Exactly." She yawned, exhaustion overtaking her. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Ruby." He pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Sleep well." Despite the hard ground and cold air, Ruby fell asleep quickly, lulled by Owen's steady heartbeat and the security of his presence. The final day of their journey dawned clear and cold. They broke camp early, eager to reach the ranch before nightfall. The snow had compacted somewhat overnight, making travel slightly easier, but it was still slow going compared to their outward journey. By mid-afternoon, familiar landmarks began to appear. Ruby felt a surge of emotion as they crested a rise and saw the ranch buildings in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney of the main house. "Home," she said softly, surprising herself with the depth of feeling the word evoked. Owen glanced at her, a smile warming his face. "Home," he echoed. "It's good to hear you call it that." They rode into the yard as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow. Several ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse to greet them, including Billy, who hurried forward to take their horses. "Glad you made it back safe, Miss Thorne, Mr. Morgan," he said, eyeing the snow-crusted state of their clothing and gear. "We was starting to worry with that big storm." "We waited it out in the line shack at Pine Creek," Owen explained, helping Ruby dismount. Her legs felt wobbly after days in the saddle. "How are things here?" "All quiet," Billy reported. "Mrs. Abernathy's been by every day, keeping the house warm and leaving food. Said to tell you she'll come tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Billy." Ruby managed a tired smile. "It's good to be back." As the boy led their horses toward the stable, Owen turned to Ruby. "You should go inside, get warm. I'll see to the unpacking." She nodded gratefully, too exhausted to argue. The house was indeed warm, with a fire burning low in the main room fireplace. Mrs. Abernathy had left a pot of stew warming on the stove and fresh bread wrapped in a cloth. The familiar smells and sights of the house, a house Ruby had come to think of, as hers brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She had made it back. The journey had been successful, both in terms of the cattle contracts and in the unexpected development of her relationship with Owen. For the first time since leaving Connecticut, Ruby felt truly certain about her path forward. After washing away the dust and grime of travel and changing into clean clothes, Ruby returned downstairs to find Owen in the kitchen, serving 2 bowls of Mrs. Abernathy's stew. "I thought we could eat in here," he said. "More comfortable than the dining room, and the stove makes it warmer." Ruby agreed readily. They sat at the kitchen table, too tired for much conversation but sharing occasional smiles that spoke volumes about their changed relationship. As they finished eating, Owen said, "I should go to my quarters. Let you get some proper rest." Ruby nodded, though part of her was reluctant to see him leave. "Will I see you tomorrow? Count on it." He stood, gathering their empty bowls. "There's ranch business to discuss after all." The twinkle in his eye told her he was thinking of more than ranch business, and Ruby felt a pleasant warmth that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. Owen moved to the door, then turned back. "Ruby." "Yes." He crossed the room in 2 strides, bent down, and kissed her, not the gentle kiss they had shared in the line shack, but something deeper, more insistent. His hand cradled the back of her head, fingers tangling in her hair. Ruby responded with equal fervor, weeks of growing attraction finding release in the embrace. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed for a moment as if gathering his composure. "I've been wanting to do that since Cheyenne," he admitted, his voice rough. "I'm glad you finally did," Ruby replied, her hand still resting on his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palms. With visible reluctance, Owen stepped back. "Good night, Ruby Thorne. Dream of me." "I will," she promised. Knowing it was true, after he left, Ruby climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her body weary but her mind and heart full. So much had changed in the weeks since her arrival in Wyoming. The mail-order bride who had stepped off the train, anxious and uncertain, had become a woman who negotiated cattle contracts and rode through snowstorms without complaint. A woman who was beginning to love a man she had never expected to meet, in a place she had never expected to call home. As she drifted off to sleep in her own bed for the first time in over a week, Ruby's last conscious thought was that sometimes life's unexpected turns led to the most perfect destinations. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Ruby continued learning the business aspects of the ranch, now with the practical experience of the Cheyenne negotiations behind her. Owen maintained his role as foreman, but spent more time at the main house, often joining Ruby for dinner and lingering afterward for conversation by the fire. Their courtship progressed with a blend of frontier practicality and traditional respect. Owen was careful to maintain propriety when the ranch hands were present, but when they were alone, he showed Ruby a tenderness and passion that continually surprised and delighted her. December arrived with more snow and preparations for Christmas. Ruby, determined to create a proper celebration, enlisted Mrs. Abernathy's help in planning a feast for the ranch hands and decorating the house with pine boughs and ribbon. "It's good to see you settling in so well, Mrs. Abernathy remarked as they hung garlands in the main room. "And if I may say so, you and Mr. Morgan make a fine pair." Ruby blushed, though she was pleased by the older woman's approval. "Is it that obvious to anyone with eyes?" Mrs. Abernathy replied with a chuckle. "The way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Well, it speaks volumes." "We're taking things slowly," Ruby said, feeling a need to explain, "given the circumstances of my arrival here." Mrs. Abernathy nodded understanding. "Wise, perhaps, though life out here is too short and too hard for unnecessary delays when hearts are involved." She gave Ruby a meaningful look. "Mr. Davies would have wanted your happiness, my dear. Everyone who knew him would tell you the same." Ruby appreciated the reassurance. Though she had come to terms with her evolving feelings for Owen, part of her still felt a lingering obligation to the man who had brought her west. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That means a great deal to me." On Christmas Eve, the ranch house was filled with warmth, light, and the tantalizing smells of Mrs. Abernathy's cooking. Ruby had invited all the ranch hands for dinner, wanting to thank them for their hard work and loyalty. The long dining table had been extended with boards and sawhorses to accommodate everyone. Owen arrived early to help with final preparations, looking uncommonly polished in a clean shirt and string tie. He presented Ruby with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I thought we might exchange gifts privately," he explained, "before the men arrive." Ruby retrieved her gift for him from beneath the small pine tree she had set up in the corner of the main room. They sat before the fire, suddenly shy with each other. "You first," Owen urged, nodding at the package in her hands. Ruby carefully unwrapped it to reveal a small wooden box with intricate carving on the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver brooch in the shape of a rose, its petals detailed with remarkable craftsmanship. "Owen," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful." "I had it made in Cheyenne," he explained. "While you were resting at the hotel that first night, I saw it in a jeweler's window and thought of you immediately." Ruby was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Help me put it on." He pinned it carefully to the collar of her dress, his fingers brushing her neck in a way that sent shivers down her spine. "Perfect," he murmured, stepping back to admire the effect. "Your turn," Ruby said, handing him her gift. Owen unwrapped it to find a leather-bound journal and a quality fountain pen. "Open the journal," she suggested. He did, finding an inscription on the first page in Ruby's neat handwriting. "For the stories of your adventures, past and future. May our shared chapter be the longest and happiest. With love, Ruby." Owen looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "This is—" He cleared his throat. "This is the finest gift I've ever received." "I noticed you often tell stories of your travels but never write them down," Ruby explained. "I thought perhaps you might want to preserve them." "I will," he promised, closing the journal carefully. "Thank you, Ruby, for this and for—" He gestured vaguely, seeming to encompass everything between them. "You're welcome," she said softly, "and thank you for helping me find my place here." He leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle kiss that held promise of deeper passion. "You've made your own place," he corrected when they parted. "I just had the good fortune to be here as you did it." The sound of voices outside announced the arrival of the ranch hands. Owen stood, offering Ruby his hand. Ready to play hostess to a dozen hungry cowboys, she smiled, taking his hand and rising to her feet. More than ready. The Christmas Eve dinner was a resounding success. The men, initially awkward in the formal setting of the dining room, relaxed as the meal progressed, sharing stories and laughter. Ruby had arranged small gifts for each of them: new gloves, pocket knives, tobacco pouches, which were received with genuine appreciation. As the evening drew to a close, one of the older hands, Peterson, raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Miss Thorne," he said, "who's proven herself a true rancher these past months, and to Mr. Davies, who'd be proud of how his legacy continues." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, raising their cups. Ruby felt tears prick her eyes at the simple but heartfelt tribute. "Thank you all," she said when she could trust her voice, "for your hard work, your loyalty, and for accepting me as part of this ranch. I'm grateful to each of you." After the men had departed to the bunkhouse, Ruby and Owen remained by the fire, reluctant to end the evening. "That went well," Owen observed, stretching his legs toward the hearth. "You've won them over completely, you know." "I've tried to be fair and to learn what I needed to know," Ruby said. "They've made it easy by being patient with my ignorance. It's more than that." Owen turned to look at her directly. "You've shown genuine interest in their work and their lives. That means something to men who are used to being treated as interchangeable hired hands." Ruby hadn't thought of it that way. "They're not just employees to me, they're part of what makes this place work, part of its family, I suppose." Owen's expression softened. "That's why they respect you and why I—" He hesitated. "Why you what?" Ruby prompted gently. He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Why I love you, Ruby Thorne." The words, spoken so simply but with such evident feeling, took her breath away. Though their growing attachment had been clear to both of them, neither had voiced it so directly until now. "Owen," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper, "I love you too." He drew her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. "I never expected this," he confessed into her hair. "When you stepped off that train, I thought you represented everything that wouldn't work in this territory: too refined, too Eastern, too proper." Ruby laughed softly. "And I thought you were too wild, too rough, too Western." "I suppose we were both wrong." His arms tightened around her. "Gloriously wrong." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Finally, reluctantly, Owen stood. "I should go. It's late and propriety must be maintained, however much I wish otherwise." Ruby rose as well, smoothing her skirts. "Yes, I suppose it must." She looked up at him through her lashes. For now, at least. The implications of her words were not lost on Owen. His eyes darkened with an intensity that made her heart race. "Ruby Thorne, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "Perhaps." She felt bold, empowered by the love between them. "Though not until things are official." Owen took her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Then let's make them official. Marry me, Ruby. Not because you came west to be a bride, not because of the ranch, but because we've found something worth building a life around." Though she had begun to hope for such a proposal, the reality of it overwhelmed her. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Owen Morgan." His smile was radiant as he pulled her close for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "How soon?" he asked. "I'm not a patient man when it comes to having you as my wife." Ruby laughed. "Spring would be lovely for a wedding, don't you think? After the worst of winter has passed, when the land is coming back to life." "Spring it is," Owen agreed, though the look in his eyes suggested he would count every day until then. I'll speak to Reverend Thomas in town next week." As they said their good nights at the door, Ruby felt a contentment she had never expected to find when she boarded that train in Connecticut months ago. She had come west as a mail-order bride for a man she'd never met. Instead, she had found independence, purpose, and a love that had grown naturally from respect and shared challenges. The winter months passed in a flurry of ranch work, wedding preparations, and deepening love between Ruby and Owen. They set a date in early April, when the worst of the snow would be gone, but before the busiest season of ranch work began. Ruby wrote to her mother with the news, explaining the circumstances of Walter's death and her unexpected love for Owen. The reply, when it came, was a mixture of relief, confusion, and cautious blessing. "Your father would say you've had a remarkable stroke of fortune," her mother wrote, "to find love and security in such unlikely circumstances. I must admit I worried terribly when you left, but your letters show a happiness I haven't seen in you for years. I only wish I could attend your wedding, though the journey is impossible for me to undertake." Ruby shared the letter with Owen one evening as they sat by the fire. "She's right, you know," she said as he handed it back to her, "about the remarkable stroke of fortune." "For both of us," Owen agreed, drawing her closer to his side. "Though I prefer to think of it as something more than luck, perhaps it's what was meant to be all along." The idea was comforting that all the twists and turns of their lives had been leading them to each other, to this place, to this love that had blossomed so unexpectedly. As April approached, the land began to awaken from its winter slumber. The snow receded, revealing patches of earth that would soon turn green. Ruby found herself watching the transformation with new eyes, seeing the cycles of the ranch and the seasons with a deeper appreciation. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and early wildflowers. Ruby dressed in a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her alter from one of her Eastern dresses, simpler now but no less elegant. Her hair was arranged in a loose knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with sprigs of pine and small white flowers from Mrs. Abernathy's greenhouse. The ceremony took place on the ranch, in the meadow behind the house where Owen had first shown Ruby the boundaries of her property. Reverend Thomas came from town to officiate, and the guests included all the ranch hands, Mrs. Abernathy and her husband, and several neighbors and townspeople who had become friends over the months. As Ruby walked toward Owen, who waited beneath an arch twined with evergreens, she thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment. The trunk her family had packed for a man she'd never met. The train ride west into uncertainty. The unexpected news of Walter's death. The gradual discovery of her own strength and capabilities. And finally, the love that had grown between her and this remarkable man who now waited to make her his wife. Owen's eyes never left her as she approached, his expression a mixture of awe and profound joy. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, holding them as if they were precious beyond measure. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Thomas began, his voice carrying across the meadow, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over Ruby as she stood hand in hand with Owen, but it was the personal vows they had written that brought tears to her eyes. "Ruby," Owen said, his voice steady and sure, "when you arrived at this ranch, I promised a man I respected that I would look after you. Today, I make that promise directly to you. I will protect you, provide for you, and partner with you in all things. But more than that, I promise to love you with everything I am, to cherish your strength and your gentleness equally, and to walk beside you through whatever life brings our way." Ruby blinked back tears as she spoke her own vows. "Owen," I came west prepared to build a life with a stranger. Instead, I found a man who saw me clearly from the beginning, my capabilities, my potential, my heart. I promise to be your equal partner in our ranch and our life together. To support your dreams as you have supported mine. To love you faithfully and completely for all our days. They exchanged simple gold bands, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward was joyous and relaxed, with tables set up in the yard, abundant food prepared by Mrs. Abernathy and several neighbor women, and music provided by two ranch hands who played fiddle and harmonica. As the afternoon waned, Owen pulled Ruby aside from the festivities, leading her to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, the name still new and wonderful to her ears, "are you happy?" Ruby looked up at him, this man who had become the center of her world in ways she had never anticipated. "Completely," she assured him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "When Walter decided to send for a mail-order bride, I told him he was taking a risk, that a city woman might never adapt to ranch life. And now," Ruby prompted, smiling, "now I thank God every day that he ignored my advice." Owen's blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "And that you were brave enough to pack your trunk and journey west to a man you'd never met. Only to fall in love with his foreman instead," Ruby teased. Owen laughed, pulling her close. "A scandalous turn of events, Mrs. Morgan." "But a fortunate one," she replied, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "The most fortunate of my life." As they returned to their wedding celebration, hand in hand, Ruby marveled at the journey that had brought her to this place and this man. She had come west as a mail-order bride, her trunk packed for a stranger. Instead, she had found herself her strength, her purpose, her capacity for love. And in Owen Morgan, she had found a partner who valued all of those things and more. It wasn't the future she had expected when she boarded that train in Connecticut. It was infinitely better, a love story written not in letters exchanged between strangers, but in shared experiences, mutual respect, and a passion that had grown from the fertile soil of the Wyoming territory they both now called home.